we got architecture, but that wasn't necessarily the end game of strategy. The end game of strategy is to grow the strategy practice.
Welcome to the Architect My Life podcast. I'm Shlachter, your host, CEO of MGS Global Group, supporting architecture and design firms. We provide BIM modeling and drafting services to overwhelmed architects and design firm owners. On my podcast, I talk to successful women firm owners and entrepreneurs to discuss their challenges, share our experiences, and above all, celebrate each other's success. My core business, MGS Global, started as a part-time gig when I was a new mom. It has now grown to a thriving business, providing architectural support to the creatives, which helps everyone maintain a healthy work-life balance. The Architect My Life podcast is where I hope you learn to achieve your goals through genuine stories and conversations with other successful women in the industry. Now let's dive into this episode. Hi everybody, our guest this week is Evelyn Lee. Evelyn Lee, FAIA, is the first ever Global Head of Workplace Strategy and Innovation at Slack Technologies. She's the founder of the Practice of Architecture and co-host of the podcast Practice Disrupted. Evelyn seamlessly integrates her business and architecture background with a qualitative and quantitative focus to build a better experience for the organization's employees, clients, and guests. Evelyn received her Bachelor of Architecture degree from Drury University, where she minored in global studies while playing on the women's soccer team. She received her Master's of Architecture degree from Southern California Institute of Architects. Evelyn also finished a dual Master's in Public Administration and Master's in Business Administration in Sustainable Management from the Presidio Graduate School. She is widely published, wrote a monthly column for Contract Magazine for over 3 years, and is a frequent contributor to Architect Magazine. Evelyn has received numerous industry awards, including the 2016 40 Under 40 Award for Building Design and Construction, and the 2014 AIA National Young Architects Award. She recently served as the first ever female treasurer to the AIA National Board in 2020 and 2021. Evelyn has over 15 years of working with individuals, organizations, and companies interested in applying design thinking to their decision-making process. I am so thrilled to talk to her today. Welcome to the show, Evelyn. This is my first question I love asking my guests. Tell us about a childhood experience, a person, or a place that influenced you to be an architect.
Well, it's interesting. So when I was in middle school or just starting high school, I already knew. I was one of those silly people that knew at a very young age that I wanted to do something architecturally. I always talked about this experience in fourth grade when my teacher asked everyone to draw their dream homes. And I feel like most fourth graders tend to draw an elevation, and I started to draw and plan, right? And I put a Nintendo, like the original Nintendo, so this is dating me, game system in every single bedroom in the house. That's to the detail I was drawing down to. But I think what really, really solidified it is Los Alamos was doing this capital campaign for a brand new library because they had hired this, or they got this, world famous architects to design the space. And, I didn't really fully understand how much emotion physical space can emote out of somebody just by walking into a good space. Right. Because at that time, I wasn't very much a global traveler, and my parents weren't architects. So we never, if we traveled somewhere, we were going there for theme parks and other reasons. I would say we weren't going there to go and step into great buildings. So Antoine Predock finished the architect or our local community library, and that space, especially the second floor, which very few people outside of administrative staff tend to wander to, became the spot that I would go after school whenever I needed focus time to do studying. And it became one of my favorite spaces in Los Alamos.
So that was in your fourth grade?
Well, no. So that was fourth grade. I knew I wanted to be an architect, but I didn't fully understand the power of architecture until middle school, high school, whenever that project was finished. But I found myself, driving to the library often to visit that space and to find quiet time and do heads down work. I never the library up to that point was just a place that you went and got books when I was very little, but not a place that I actively sought out until pre-doc finished his library. And then became a place I actively sought out.
See, I always believe that experiences can really shape the future, especially when you start as a child. So I feel like you're the master of reinvention and transition. So you transitioned several times from architecture school to later on taking your MPA and MBA, and then from architecture to technology. So walk us through your decision making process or your thought process that led you to the transition, and what were the hurdles that you went through when you decided to leave the profession?
Oh yeah, I think this is so like documented in a variety of different ways and different places, and I have quite a few transitions, so I'll try to keep it short and feel free to interrupt with any questions. But I always knew I wanted to be from an architect from a very young age. I think I only knew that because like my parents saw me drawing and plan, and then they're like, "Oh, you want to be an architect." But having not gone to school or having not known an architect, and one of my formidable experiences, like literally being the library in my hometown, I didn't really fully knew what that entailed until I started applying for schools, right? And at that time, I also was just looking for a school that would give me a soccer scholarship too, which is really hard to do. I didn't understand why, but after being in architecture school, then you understand why it's hard to do athletics and architecture at the same time. So I did. I went through school. I had a good school. They told me like all the steps that it takes to get licensed, and I was just like, oh, what did I really sign myself up for at that point? And I graduated. Well, I went to grad school. I went from Drury to SciArc. I graduated. It was a little bit of, it wasn't a dip. Oddly enough, I was already interested in a firm that was doing things beyond architecture, that were doing like branding and other things. So I guess this is the first time I've kind of actually realized that. But I landed at this firm called WD Partners, and they were doing really interesting things with national chains around branding. And that's what I wanted to do. But they had a newly opened office in Irvine that was just doing Home Depot sided apps. So essentially, that's what I ended up doing my first year outside of school. And as you can imagine, that became very quickly repetitive. And I was just like, I need something more fulfilling. So then I went and I worked for Dougherty Architects. They do K through 12 and community buildings, and Betsy and Brian were wonderful in the fact that they gave me an opportunity to run a lot of the firm's pro bono projects, which was great. But I also, doing schools in California involves the Department of the State Architect. It's like another layer of authority to get buildings built. And then, of course, everything goes to the lowest bidder, right? So then you get all of these contractors that are trying to, like, that are literally spending half of their job looking for mistakes in your drawings to bid, to change order their way to a profit. And I was just like, this is really just like such a horrible environment to be in. And even though we were doing these schools and influencing the future of our communities, my touch points as an architect with the actual community was so little throughout that entire process. I was hoping to get more engagement, right? And then even though we updated air conditioning and technologies in schools, I had teachers complaining to me that, they need an extension cord for their coffee machine now. The rewards just weren't there, right? So
Yeah.
I I began looking for something else. And that's when I went to public architecture. And I had a friend, John Kerry at the time, who was the executive director, but he got invited to do a fellowship for the American Academy in Rome. So he was going to be out of the US for a year. So that job was only really supposed to be a year. It was a program manager for the One Plus project there. So I went to business school. I added my MPA. And then when I exited, I knew that I wanted to stay close to architecture, but I didn't want to do what I was doing before. So I worked at MK Think, and I worked under the principal Nate Gore there, supporting this and running the strategy team. And the strategy team was really interesting because it was really just set up to expand architectural services on both sides of the project, both pre-architectural services and post-architectural services. How do we expand that engagement with the client? And that's kind of where strategy sat. So that was really interesting. I felt like I did all the growing I could there. A friend offered me an opportunity to go into brokerage, which I don't necessarily recommend.
What is
And we
brokerage?
can
Can you explain?
brokerage. So brokerage is so like Newmark, Knight Frank, or Newmark. Now they're just called Newmark, CBRE, JLLs, like all of the big brokerages have consulting groups with them, but they're all very competitive, internally competitive. And so not only did I have to sell, and the brokers are the gatekeepers to the clients. So I felt like at MK Think, I was working directly with the clients. At brokerage, I feel like I had two clients that I had to please. I had to please the brokers and then the end clients. And I had to sell twice because the brokers were the gatekeepers to the clients. So I had to sell to the brokers who then would introduce me to the clients and then I would get the job. So I feel like I spent 80% of my job in brokerage selling rather than doing, which is why I left brokerage. And but the work at brokerage was a lot of workplace change management. Pre-pandemic, people were figuring out how to minimize their floor plate and spend less on office space. And that's ultimately where I ended up at Slack because they were looking for somebody to help standardize design guidelines, help to standardize decision-making process around our offices. A lot of tech companies that grow so quickly, you find that the office manager becomes like the head of workplace services, becomes like the head of real estate. So they don't necessarily have an architectural background and they're learning as they're building the plane, right? As they fly it. And everything they learn is from consultants. But I was the first like architect that they were bringing in-house to work
So
there.
let's step back a little bit. So the MK Think really helped you with expand your business operations and consultancy, correct? It really ignited your interest in this.
Yeah, I mean the great thing with MK Think is, and by this time I have served many years within the AIA, right? So I already had this idea that like there's a certain way of things that where we were a certain way of that we were doing things in traditional practice, and I was just like always asking like why are we doing it that way as one of those people, right? And I believed, we complain a lot about services getting taken away from us, right? Like that project managers like took services away from us, that contractors took services away from us. But if you're in a competitive marketplace, like that's true of any industry, right? Unless you're able to kind of hold on to your services and sell your value, that can happen to anyone, not just architects. So, how are other people doing that? And why are we just sitting here complaining that people are taking away space without taking it back? So, for me, MK Think was like this really interesting business opportunity to talk about how a small and medium sized firm, when people think about strategy groups, they think about the Genslers and the Perkins and Wills and the HOKs. And then if you look at what they're doing within those strategy groups, a lot of them in what we call in tech is go to market strategy. Like they're not
Yeah.
necessarily getting paid for the strategy work, but the strategy work, or if they are, the strategy work is an entree to the architecture work. But a lot of the strategy groups at those big firms carry a lot of research and a lot of overhead. Flip it to MK Think, the strategy group was the group that was bringing in the majority of the revenue and profitability to the firm. And if we got architecture, great, but that wasn't necessarily the end game of strategy, is to get the architecture. The end game of strategy is to grow the strategy practice. So it was very much here is what other things that an architecture and design firm could be doing to stay relevant and take back some of that space that we always complain about having lost.
Is yeah. So is this how practice of architecture was born? I would like to know what is your origin story of practice of architecture because it's quite
Yeah.
massive. It's interesting.
I don't know if it's massive. I would love for it to be massive.
I think it is. I read all your newsletters and and you have a lot of podcasts, but talk about your origin story and what you do exactly. Where do you want to be in terms of, the practice of architecture? Because this is kind of like your entrepreneurial venture, right? This is your
It
baby.
is. It is. It is very much. And I think there's been a small part of me that's always been an entrepreneur, like wanting
Yeah.
to sell things and make money. Not for money making sake, but also like to create change and build community. So um practice of architecture grew out of my time in business school, frankly. I was sitting in marketing and finance and economics and learning all these principles and reading all of these articles that I wish I had in my professional practice class, but didn't, right? In that 1 hour where you're usually going over the architect's handbook for practice. That's usually how the syllabi are created, right? For that. So at the beginning, it was purely here's what I'm reading in business school. You guys might want to check it out. And I wasn't even helping them bridge the link as to why it's relevant to architects. I was just curating content for architects from other industries that they might want to check out. And then I realized I was just curating. It was purely curating articles. And then I was like, okay, I need to make that connection. And then I left business school with huge ideas, right? There's all of these accelerators and incubators being launched. Like, I want practice of architecture to be the incubators for new ideas coming out of architecture firms, which is still ultimately, frankly, the goal is to help architects expand their services to continue to remain relevant, but also be profitable when their clients aren't building. That's been the goal. But then the pandemic hit, and I realized all of the forward thinking firms are already out there doing that. They don't need help. So how do I move the needle on the majority of practice to get them to think differently? So we dialed it back now, and right now it's focused on business operations coming out of the pandemic and how you run hybrid teams and how you run remote teams. It's really focused on creating a culture of innovation. So then we can have that innovation conversation. But I feel like most architecture firms are the way they're set up, they can't help but be in the weeds with project work and project pipeline. It's hard to get them to explore anything beyond that. So I need to help them put the systems in place to free up that brain space to allow them to do that.
So is this through your curated content, or do you have like training, or do you have like a course that people can sign up for, or consulting?
That would be perfect, wouldn't it? Yeah, no. Um, yeah. So there are a handful of architecture firms that I have consulted with for a variety of different things, but it's usually focused on strategic operations and building inefficiencies on the business operations side. So I do consult with firms on and off. I, given my full-time day job, there's only so many firms that I can take out any one time and do that. So a lot of it is, for a while I wrote for Contract Magazine and Architect Magazine. I actually think I'm going to bring that writing back in-house to practice of architecture. But it's a lot of articles on how to think differently about business operations. So an example would be if you're looking to increase EDI, right? You shouldn't be talking about culture fit anymore. You should be talking about culture add and how that mindset might shift how you approach your hiring process along with like inclusivity. So just articles informing them. And then for me, the podcast has become an extension of that conversation too, right? So how do we bring in people that are forward thinking or people that have transitioned to other careers and talk about all the things that architects could be doing if we allowed ourselves to explore those things?
That's true. And I read all your content about business operations because, I protect my
I,
time so much. I think I read an article that you said, or a podcast, that you have to build everything up front right now in your operation so you could free up your time for the future and spend more time business development instead of doing everything at the firm. So can you talk a little bit about your agile practice? You said you're building something or practice of architecture on agile practice?
Yeah, so I actually need to this is a good reminder that I need to update the front page of my practice of architecture. So only my newsletters or newsletter readers know about the agile practice. And then really it is right now it's a series of like 60 different questions you can be asking yourself as a firm leader as to whether or not your systems allow you and your culture allow you to be more agile. And then I'm building out content. I do a lot of research for all of these articles that I write for Architect and Contract Magazine. So I'm beginning to share out like my research process. So if for any reason you want to look at like the articles that I'm researching to write the articles, if you want to go deeper dive into something, it allows people to do that. But the other thing is, like I said, I'm moving all of my articles. I'm doing a lot more self-publishing and moving all of my articles on that platform. But it's really about how do we take this idea of agility and nimbleness and begin to build it into the firm. We haven't fully immersed from from COVID, the pandemic. I mean, maybe the pandemic is now an endemic and we're living with it, right? And you going to get the booster shots or the flu shot, like is synonymous as the flu shots. But there's going to be other things that take us out of our offices that physically disconnect us. So how do we build businesses that can thrive and have business continuity through those times? And how do we change the way we work, frankly, to offer caregivers, because we're going to have more people like you and I, right? Of this, we're in the sandwich generation. I'm going to be dealing with end of life, let alone the like raising my children at the same time. So it's caregiving on both sides of the spectrum. So how do I, is there a way to set up your firm to support individuals like myself to give them the flexibility they need to do those things and still have a full-time job? So that's when I'm talking about agility, is just how do you constantly have this culture of
Flexibility also.
innovation change, right?
Yeah.
To continue to adapt over time.
Yeah.
Um, as your people go through different stages of life, right? If you keep a person for their entire career, which rarely happens, but you're keeping them as like, the 20 something who can give you the hours, and then they have a partner and then they have children, like your commitment to your work changes over time. So even if you want to hold on as a partner in the firm, you want to change how much you're able to give to your work. These are kind of all principles that we should be building into our businesses.
So yeah, I actually read a lot about your articles through the LinkedIn US Creator Accelerator program. Can you talk about that? And I mean, your focus on technology and innovation. How did you get into that program?
Yeah, it's interesting. So there's a lot of I mean, any social media platform right now has creators that are creating on that platform. LinkedIn has the fewest amount of creators. They say like only 1%, maybe 2% of all of the people who are on LinkedIn are actually creating on the platform, and they're trying to grow their community. So they have committed, I don't know, an X number of millions of dollars to growing more creators on the platform. And depending on how often you publish, I got invited. I got an email saying there's this LinkedIn CAP, the Creator Accelerator program. Do you want to apply? And I applied and I got accepted. There's 120 of us in the US. There's other cohorts in the UK and India, and they encourage us to post 3 times a day, or not 3 times a day. That would have been a
Oh,
huge
wow.
commitment. No, 3 times a week. So they encourage us to post 3 times a week. And this latest one has a focus specifically on innovation and technology. So I've been focused on, what is technological debt? How does it show up in architecture firms? How do we get rid of technological debt and really understand what tool stacks we're using? I just posted something yesterday on, and it's getting a lot of critical and good feedback. But I have clients or had clients that used to do floor plans in Excel,
I
and
saw that.
yeah, right. And sure, they're using the tools they have, and I think we do that a lot to her. Like as architects, we would never use like Excel to do a floor plan. But I think that same principle applies to some of the other tools that we're trying to use, right? That a flip of that is I think we use Excel to manage too much of our business sometimes, right? And that
Yeah.
actually decreases productivity. So an example I gave in one of my articles was you said enter all of my timesheets in Excel, right? And then the business our bookkeeper would have to take all those timesheets and she'd literally copy and paste it into like a project dashboard that they've all developed in Excel. And then by the time my project managers saw my timesheet, that data was a week old, right? But so it's like it was a mechanism to say like we do this to ourselves. Like we are not using our products and tools correctly.
So is that
You'll
what
love
technical debt
this.
means? Yeah. Can you tell me? I read the article. I know what it is, but can you explain what technical debt is to our listeners?
Yeah, you'll appreciate this, Aya, just because of what the MGS Global Group does. But like, if you have Revit or BIM and you are only using it as CAD, then the technical debt that you have is how you're not either fully utilizing the software to your benefit because you're paying a lot more than what you're using it for. So that's like one example of a technical debt. Another example of technical debt is so that's what you're paying too much and using too little. Another example is of I'm all in all these forums and architects want that one thing that can do it all. They want the one tool that is a good CRM, that is a good project manager, that does accounting, that tracks time and does resource management and stuff like that. Um, but if you look at a core, at what a CRM, a contact resource management software does, you don't want an expert who's working on CRM to be the same people that are building out the project management tool. It's hard to do it all well, right? So in that sense, I feel like we're not spending enough money on programs that can actually streamline productivity and increase communications. So technical debt goes both ways, and in that sense, you're gaining an accumulation of time. It's like because you're spending extra time on these processes that could be streamlined if you invested more in technology. So it's either a time sink or a money sink. And it's called debt because it compounds over time as as your projects get more complex, but you don't understand the complexity of the software that you're using to solve those solutions, or as you invest or as you scale your firm and you have to spend more time copying and pasting timesheets in, it doesn't
Evelyn, I think
scale, right?
you and I can geek out on all this because I have like five different types of software
Yeah.
that I've researched that I'm using, and it's always changing depending on the size of the team so that everyone can work efficiently and not use just Excel for everything. So I completely understand.
Yeah. So anyways, I probably have like gone on my soapbox for technical debt, but and frankly, it's not something that just architecture firms struggle with. Salesforce struggles with technical debt. Um, any small and medium sized organization focuses struggles from technical debt, but it's a balance between understanding that there's a cost for doing business, but also you need to give your people the right tools so they can execute well, right?
Yes. And speaking of this content accelerator, you also talk about technology and innovation. And one of your posts in LinkedIn, you talked about your digital headquarters. Do you think that a lot of the firms now have digital headquarters post pandemic? What do you see right now in terms of architecture firms adapting to having a digital headquarters?
Yeah, I mean, I think most companies actually have digital headquarters. And by digital headquarters, I mean I don't know. I might get in trouble at Slack for saying this. So at Slack, we call Slack our digital HQ. So it's like the one place you go to get all the information that you need. But I really think if you think about a building, right, and all the systems that go into a building, like your physical HQ, your digital HQ is similarly held up by the various different technology stacks that you have. So I feel like in the move to remote work, everybody created a digital HQ. Anyone can build a building of a certain, like, anyone can occupy a building and call it an HQ. But that doesn't mean it's like finely tuned for productivity, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot
Yeah.
of people out there that adopted Teams. I forgive you. I understand that you are already paying for like the Microsoft suite and Teams is free. So that's another, we want the free thing, but that's fine. But so a lot of
We use
architecture,
Slack.
yeah. Thank you, Aya. No, but a lot of architecture firms like adopted Teams, but then they didn't set up protocols for how they communicate, right? So I always talk to a lot of middle managers that are like, if I talk to this partner, I need to text them. If I talk to this partner, I need to email them. If I talk to this partner, they're actually using Teams. So unless you're using your products consistently, then you're not getting the most out of your digital HQ. Right.
That's true. Wow. Evelyn, I feel like we need another episode on just digital headquarters and technical debt, a separate one. Um, how did you get involved in the AIA, Evelyn? Because you were the
Um,
first woman treasurer, right? For national.
yeah, I was.
Yeah.
I had a very long service in the AIA. I had a wonderful AIAS chapter in my undergrad,
Mhm.
and I was involved in that. I was never in leadership. I was like head of communications at one point, but that's like I wasn't quote like a president of my local AIAS chapter or anything. But as soon as I got out of school, I knew that I needed to seek out an IDP mentor. Now it's AXP, right? And it's better for that mentor for me to be outside of my firm. So having had such a great AIAS experience, I went to my local AIA chapter, right? And one thing leads to another. No, we don't have that program, but if you would like to set up that program, you're welcome to set up that program and run with it. So, um, I actually declined that. I was like, can you just put me in touch with somebody who would be willing to be my mentor? And they offered that. But that person happened to be highly involved in the AIA California board. And they asked me to come back and run for a position. And that was, I feel like that's how a lot of people get tapped into leadership at the AIA board, right? It's because somebody else asked you to join and participate. And someone else believed in you. So somebody else believed in me.
But that's pretty awesome. And I know you're a catalyst for change and you talk about, strengthening the business of architecture and empowering small firm architects as well. I have a question. Being a catalyst for change, I know you do your own thing in practice of architecture, but what do you think of the areas of AIA might be improved to help their members?
Yeah. And so I ran for president last year, and one of the things that I was pretty adamant about, and truth be told, I work at I work at Slack. I'm not saying the AIA needs to run on Slack, but we're in the process of onboarding Salesforce onto Slack. It's as large as the AIA. It's 90,000 people broadly, but we are helping one another work better in distributed teams. So the AIA has this wonderful membership of nearly 90,000 members globally. And I think we interact very well at our local level or at our state level or at our national level, but they're very much siloed, right? And a COTE committee in San Francisco doesn't really always know what the COTE committee in AIADC is doing. So, how do we begin to knock down those silos and knowledge share more quickly? I see a lot of reinvention of the wheel happening in the AIA, right? Like everyone has spun up these technology and practice groups, but none of the individual component technology and practice groups are talking to one another. So I feel like a tool that would allow us to share our knowledge more freely would be helpful to supporting not only our education. Well, it would save time because we're not constantly reinventing the wheel, but it would better connect all of our members globally, and I think it would move the profession forward more quickly. The other thing I think the AIA does really well is we have national puts out a ton of tremendous resources and studies, but I don't feel like a lot of our members fully utilize all the resources that we put out. Like there's a great study that came out in December about the elephant in the well-designed room by UC
Mhm.
Hastings. And, you know, this is a study that we contracted an outside the Center of Work-Life Law to put together. It has some amazing takeaways on what you can do in your firm to begin to talk about the elephant in the well-designed room. But you know, I don't know how many members knows that exists or how many members even know the various different handbooks. You know, there's all of these resources that we've put out there around like how to commit to the 2030 commitment, right?
Yeah.
But it's a lot, some of these
Yeah.
resources. So is there a mechanism that is there a way to onboard our members to these resources in a way that kind of holds their hand and helps them step through the process rather than just like throwing these 100-page reports on them and say like,
So
okay,
so really
now digest
unite
and implement.
everyone. So we're on the same page, right? With all the chapters all over the country and also globally. Because you're right, everything is a little fragmented and very regionalized, but it's
Mhm.
not nationalized. But I know we're running out of time, but this is like also one of my favorite things to ask. Who is Evelyn outside of architecture? What do you do for fun when you need to relax? Do you have any hobbies?
Oh, yeah. I used to love to play soccer until I have kids. Now I take the kids to their soccer game.
Oh,
Yeah, I think, you know, my daughter and my son, they love snuggles right now, right? They're 5 and 7. So I spend a lot of my time enjoying snuggles because I know that will eventually go away and they'll eventually outgrow it. So definitely the mom thing. And then I feel like the only reason why I'm on Facebook these days are for community groups, but there's a La Marinda Asian Moms group, for instance.
oh,
And we're going to do a girls' night out this evening in Oakland. So I'm gonna go hang out with some other La Marinda Asian moms, and do a girls' night. So I don't know. The podcast is fun. Like I don't know about you, but these type of conversations are fun. So maybe other people consider the podcast work, and some amount of work goes into that. But you know,
and I
I
see because
also
I
consider
work
that
a lot
like
and I love my like
I know
weekends
if
I
you
can
love what
catch
you
up.
do,
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
it becomes a part of who you are holistically, I think. But yeah, outside I'm just a mom and a great, hopefully wife and partner. You know, we have an au pair now, so my husband and I do date nights once a week during middle of the week.
Oh, good for you. I'm gonna tell my husband to take me out once a week.
That's been like really great to grow the relationship. And then like once a quarter we try to do an overnight stay somewhere together, and the kids have time with their old nanny at that time. So
Yeah.
it's really reconnecting with family roots, I think, um outside outside of work. But I
Yeah,
enjoy
I
these
think it's really good.
conversations, right?
No, it's good because people also ask me what you do. You're so busy, you produce so much content, da da da. I'm like, I mean, I have something, it's kind of embarrassing, but people already know I watch K drama. It's like really embarrassing, but that's my one thing that I do that a lot of people are shocked,
Yeah.
but it's
I
okay.
do binge. I do binge a lot of an astonishing amount of like Netflix and Hulu because I'm one of those
Yeah,
people that like I need background noise.
yeah,
I was one of those people that always had my headphones on studio because I was listening to some type of CD. So
yeah.
I definitely I binge all sorts of shows, and I
See, we're
cry a
human,
lot
Evelyn.
for Hallmark Channel movie channels. Yeah, like I'm a big emotional. It doesn't take a lot to like for a movie to get a tear to run down my face. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
That thanks for sharing, Evelyn. So my last question is, what is next for Evelyn Lee?
well, I have this, you know, the position at Slack is 2 months new, right? Really, like being fully ingrained into it. So most people are surprised to hear that we're learning like everyone else that we weren't remote pre-pandemic. We were only 2% remote pre-pandemic. So that's going to be a heavy lift, like change management and operations change, process and policy changes, and understanding what does the future of our offices look like. So that's big for me. Um, I am going to keep growing Practice of Architecture, the Agile Practice Resource Guide. There are courses coming soon in the future. So thank you for kind of prompting that earlier in the episode. Courses and also templates. I'm focused on building out a lot of templates on Notion for small and medium-sized design firms that don't have time to build out these business operations themselves. So I'm trying to help the small guys.
Great. Thank you so much, Evelyn. I'll drop everything in the show notes. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Yeah, thanks so much, Aya.
That was Evelyn Lee of Practice of Architecture. Thanks for listening to this episode of Architect My Life, a podcast brought to you by the MGS Global Group. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you would like to add to the conversation through your own experiences, I encourage you to be a guest on one of our upcoming episodes. Visit architectmylife.com/apply to learn how. I firmly believe that a strong community drives change and fosters success. If you'd like to be part of this community, join the All-Female Architect My Life Facebook group. Please take a moment to review us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcasts. We'd love to hear from you. Be sure to follow me on Instagram at aya_architectmylife and Architect My Life Podcast. Thanks again for listening. I'm Aya Shlachter. Until next time.